2 Apache women was found in the cold. The rancher took them in, gave them a shelter they needed. James McAllister had been riding alone for hours under the relentless sun. The wide-open plains stretched endlessly around him, a vast sea of golden grass waving in the afternoon breeze. The only sounds were the soft crunch of his horse's hooves on the dusty trail, the occasional call of a hawk overhead, and the faint murmur of the river that ran through the valley ahead. James had grown used to solitude. The life of a cowboy was not meant for company. It was meant for long hours of hard work, quiet reflection, and learning to survive with nothing but your horse, your gear, and your wits. The river came into view, sparkling under the sunlight, winding its way like a silver ribbon through the plains. James slowed his horse, shading his eyes against the glare. There was something unusual about the spot by the riverbank. At first it looked like a shadow of a tree or a large rock, but then he saw the movement. A woman, kneeling by the water, her hands moving quickly, washing something in the river. The sight was so unexpected that James almost stopped breathing. He had crossed many rivers and valleys in his life, but he had never seen anyone so alone in such a place, especially a woman from the Apache tribe. Her presence startled him, yet he was captivated. She moved with a quiet strength that seemed almost unnatural to someone who had spent so long alone on the trail. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders in loose strands, catching the sunlight in a way that made it shine like a river itself. But it was not her beauty that held his attention. It was her torn dress. The fabric was worn and shredded, clinging unevenly to her form, and James felt a jolt of concern and curiosity. How had she come to be here, alone, in the middle of nowhere, with her dress in such a state? What story lay behind those rips and tears? He dismounted slowly, not wanting to startle her. His horse nickered softly, sensing his tension, but James barely noticed. He had been trained to ride quietly, to approach with caution, especially in situations where danger was unknown. Yet, in this moment, danger seemed far away. All he could focus on was the woman and the quiet mystery that surrounded her. She worked methodically, dipping clothes into the river, rubbing the fabric against smooth stones. Her hands were skilled and sure, movements honed by practice. James admired that. He had spent years tending cattle, mending fences, and performing the endless chores of a cowboy, and he recognized talent and diligence when he saw it. As he watched, he noticed more details. Her dress was not just torn. It was stained with mud and river water, evidence of travel through rough terrain. Her bare feet were coated with dirt, and small cuts on her ankles suggested she had navigated thorns or sharp rocks. Yet she did not complain, did not flinch. Her focus remained on the task at hand. There was a quiet resilience in her, a determination that made James pause and reconsider what he had thought he knew about the world. She was a survivor, he realized, and there was a dignity in her struggle that no one could take away. James's mind wandered as he tried to piece together her story. He thought about the stories he had heard from settlers, scouts, and fellow cowboys about the Apache people. Tales of bravery, resilience, and fierce independence had been passed down for generations. Some spoke of conflict, some of hardship, and some of survival in the harshest conditions. And here she was, a living testament to those stories, right in front of him, washing clothes in the river as if the world had not touched her. It was a strange mix of fear, respect, and admiration that stirred inside him. Her head lifted slightly, eyes meeting his across the distance. There was no panic in her gaze, no immediate suspicion, only caution and awareness. James felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He wanted to speak, to introduce himself, but words seemed inadequate. What could he say to a stranger, a woman who had clearly faced hardships he could barely imagine. And yet something urged him forward, a natural curiosity, the desire to connect, to understand, and perhaps, in a small way, to help. He took a cautious step closer, his hands resting lightly on the reins. His voice, when he finally spoke, was gentle, careful, as if even the sound of words might break the delicate balance of this encounter. "Hello," he said. Simple and unassuming, the word carried across the space between them like a small bridge, and for a moment, nothing else moved. The river continued to flow, the breeze continued to rustle the grass, and the woman remained still, studying him with sharp eyes that seemed to measure every intention, every thought. Time seemed to stretch as they regarded each other. James could feel the tension, the silent conversation happening without words. He noticed the slight twitch of her hand, the way her shoulders tensed and relaxed. She had clearly learned to read the world around her, to anticipate danger, and to respond swiftly. Yet, she did not flee. She did not scream or shout. She simply waited. And in that waiting, James felt a strange kind of trust forming, fragile, yet undeniable. He looked again at her torn dress, thinking of what it must have taken to reach this place. The trails were harsh, filled with hidden obstacles, wild animals, and the unforgiving heat of the sun. She had endured all of that and still managed to maintain a sense of purpose, washing her clothes as if order in the small details could bring some control to a chaotic world. James felt a surge of respect for her, mixed with a deep, unspoken admiration. In her actions, he saw courage, independence, and a quiet defiance against the difficulties life had thrown at her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft gurgle of the river and the distant cry of a bird. James realized that this encounter was unlike anything he had experienced before. It was not just the sight of a lone woman in the wilderness. It was the realization that every person carried a story, often hidden, often shaped by struggle and survival. This woman, in her torn dress, had a story that he could not yet fully understand, but he knew it was important, powerful, and worth listening to. Finally, he offered a small gesture, a nod of respect, acknowledging her presence without imposing. The woman responded with a subtle inclination of her head, a signal that she had taken note of him, that she recognized his caution, and perhaps that she accepted it. It was a small, almost imperceptible connection. Yet in that quiet moment, James felt a shift within himself. He realized that life on the plains was full of surprises, full of encounters that could change the way one saw the world. And here, by the river, he had stumbled upon one of those rare moments. James mounted his horse again, careful not to move too quickly. He lingered for a moment, watching her continue her work, and felt a strange mix of relief, curiosity, and admiration. He did not know who she was, what her name was, or what challenges she had faced to arrive at this spot, but he sensed that this encounter would stay with him forever. It was more than just a chance meeting. It was a reminder of the strength, resilience, and quiet dignity that people could carry, even in the most difficult circumstances. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, James rode slowly along the riverbank, glancing back at the woman one last time. She continued to wash her clothes, the torn dress clinging to her in the fading light, a symbol not of weakness, but of survival and determination. James knew that he had witnessed something extraordinary, even if it was just for a brief moment. And as he rode into the distance, the image of the woman, the river, and the golden plains remained etched in his mind, a story waiting to be told, a memory that would shape the way he saw the world From that day forward, James could not stop thinking about the woman by the river. Her image lingered in his mind, like a painting he could not erase. He had traveled hundreds of miles alone on horseback, but he had never encountered anything like her. Her torn dress, her steady hands, and the quiet determination in her eyes all left a deep impression on him. Even though she had noticed him earlier, she had neither fled nor shown fear. That small act of courage stayed with him as he rode along the winding trails near the river, thinking about how resilient she must be to survive alone in such a harsh land. Over the next few days, James found himself traveling the same route along the river whenever he could. He told himself it was by chance that the river was a natural path, but deep down, he hoped he might see her again. He remembered the careful way she worked, the rhythm of her movements as she washed her clothes in the flowing water. There was something almost magical about the way she seemed at one with her surroundings, as though the river itself was helping her, guiding her hands over the stones and through the water. James had always respected nature, but seeing her interact with it so gracefully deepened that respect. One late afternoon, James spotted her again. She was farther down the river this time, kneeling on the shore with a bundle of clothes beside her. The sunlight glinted off the water and highlighted the tears and patches in her dress, making him aware of the harsh journey she had endured. But he also noticed something else: her composure. Despite the rough conditions and the weight of her clothes, she moved with calm, careful precision. Every action seemed deliberate, as though she had practiced this routine countless times, not just for cleanliness but for survival. James dismounted, his heart pounding with both anticipation and nervousness. He approached slowly, keeping his distance, not wanting to frighten her. "Hello again," he said softly, his voice barely louder than the whisper of the wind. The woman froze for a moment, then slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met his, sharp and alert, yet there was no anger or hostility in them this time. She studied him, perhaps wondering whether he posed a threat or was simply curious. James noticed how careful she was, aware of every movement, every sound. He realized that she had probably learned, from a young age, to survive in a world that was often dangerous and unforgiving. James continued to watch for a moment, taking in more details. Her hands, though small, were strong and skilled, moving quickly and efficiently through the water. Her bare feet were dirty, and small scratches on her legs suggested she had walked through thorny brush or rocky terrain to reach this place. Yet she did not complain, did not hesitate. Her torn dress, which had first shocked him, now seemed like a badge of courage, a mark of her endurance. She was clearly someone who had faced difficulties head-on and had not let them defeat her. He wondered about her story. How did she end up here, alone, in such a remote place? Had she lost her family, or been separated from them during a conflict? Or had she simply chosen this path, seeking safety and solitude in the wilderness? James knew that the Apache people had faced many hardships in recent years, and he began to understand that her torn dress might be more than just a piece of fabric. It was evidence of survival, proof that she had endured what many others could not. Finally, he decided to speak again, this time trying to sound both friendly and respectful. "Do you need help?" he asked gently. The woman paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered his words. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she returned her focus to the river, as if carefully weighing her options. James waited patiently, understanding that trust had to be earned, and that in her world, a stranger approaching could mean danger. He was not surprised by her caution. In fact, he admired it. It showed intelligence, wisdom, and strength. After a moment, she spoke in a soft, measured voice, her words cautious but clear. "I am fine," she said, her tone neither cold nor hostile, just matter of fact. Her English was broken, likely learned from observation rather than formal instruction, but it was understandable. James nodded, acknowledging her words. He wanted to say more, to communicate his respect, but he realized that words alone might not be enough. He had to show it through his actions, his patience, and his careful approach. Over the following days, James continued to cross paths with her. Each time, he made sure to keep a respectful distance, speaking only when necessary, and always with a gentle tone. Gradually, a silent understanding began to form between them. She continued to work by the river, washing clothes, gathering water, and maintaining her small makeshift camp with a quiet determination. James began to notice small things about her routine. The way she arranged her belongings, the careful steps she took along the riverbank, the way she seemed to listen to the sounds of the land. It was as if she had learned to move in harmony with her environment, to survive without needing anyone else's help. James, too, began to adapt his own behavior. He would stop and rest at a distance, observing the river and the surrounding plains. He learned to move quietly, to respect the boundaries of her space, and to recognize that trust was not given lightly. The woman, who had first stopped him cold with her torn dress and quiet strength, was teaching him something without saying a word. She was teaching him patience, respect, and the importance of observing before acting. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, James decided to offer her a small gift. He approached slowly, holding out a piece of dried meat and a small cloth he had carried with him. "For you," he said simply. The woman looked at the items, then back at him, her eyes studying his expression. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted the gift, placing it carefully beside her as if acknowledging the gesture without fully committing to trust. James nodded, understanding that this was only a small step, but an important one. Over time, their interactions continued in this cautious, respectful manner. James would bring small items when he traveled through the area, and the woman would accept them, sometimes with a nod, sometimes with a small smile. Words remained limited, but a connection began to form, a bond built on observation, respect, and shared experience. James began to see beyond the torn dress, beyond the initial shock of her appearance, and into the person she truly was, a woman of intelligence, strength, and courage, surviving on her own in a challenging world. Through these encounters, James also began to reflect on his own life. He realized how much he had taken for granted, the simplicity of his days as a cowboy compared to the complexity and hardship of hers. He understood that survival was not just about physical strength, but about mental resilience, the ability to adapt, and the courage to face uncertainty with grace. He admired her more with each passing day, not just for her appearance or her skill, but for the quiet dignity she displayed in every action. One evening, as the sun set and painted the river and plains in shades of orange and gold, James watched her pack up her small belongings and prepare to leave the river for the night. He noticed how carefully she moved, checking her surroundings, listening to the sounds of the land, and ensuring that she was safe. It was a simple act, yet it revealed so much about her character. She was not just surviving, she was thriving in her own way, finding strength and control in a world that often offered neither. As he rode away that evening, James felt a mixture of emotions: admiration, curiosity, and a growing sense of respect. He knew that he had encountered someone remarkable, someone who had taught him lessons without a single formal word being spoken. He could not predict what the future would hold, whether he would meet her again, or what challenges she might face, but he knew that the image of her by the river, her torn dress marking her journey, would remain with him forever. James realized that sometimes the most powerful stories were not those shouted from rooftops or written in history books, but those experienced quietly, in small, fleeting moments. And in that moment, watching her walk along the riverbank, he understood that he was witnessing not just survival, but a testament to human courage, resilience, and dignity. She had become more than a stranger. She had become a symbol of strength in a world that could be both beautiful and harsh, a reminder of what it meant to endure and persevere. And fully clean for all audiences, James could not shake the memory of the woman by the river. Her calm strength, her torn dress, and the way she moved with quiet determination haunted his thoughts as he rode along the plains. Every time he returned to the river, he hoped to catch another glimpse of her, not out of mere curiosity, but because he sensed there was more to her story than he could see at first glance. The days had passed since he first spotted her, yet the image of her kneeling in the water, so small yet so powerful against the vastness of the landscape, remained vivid in his mind. One morning, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and gold, James rode slowly along the familiar river trail. He was aware of every sound, the rustle of grass in the wind, the distant call of birds, and the gentle ripple of water over stones. The river seemed to carry a calm energy, and he felt a strange sense of anticipation as he neared the spot where he had first seen her. Then he saw her. She was closer than he expected, washing clothes in the shallow water, her torn dress clinging to her as it swayed in the morning breeze. She did not notice him at first, absorbed in her task, but the moment she did, her head lifted, and her eyes met his. This time James decided to approach a little closer, though still cautiously. He dismounted and walked slowly toward her, keeping his hands visible to show he meant no harm. "Good morning," he said gently, his voice steady. She paused, her hands still in the water, and studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were wary, but not unfriendly. She had learned to read people quickly, to sense whether a stranger posed danger, and to act accordingly. James could see that in her gaze, a combination of caution, intelligence, and strength. James noticed the small details he had missed before. Her dress, though torn and patched, was carefully arranged. She had clearly tried to mend it as best as she could, using scraps of fabric to hold it together. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and efficient, revealing her experience in managing life in the wilderness. He could see the dirt and scratches on her legs, evidence of travel through rough terrain. Yet there was no hesitation in the way she moved. She was confident, even in her vulnerability, and that confidence impressed him more than any display of physical strength could. He spoke again, trying to keep his tone calm and respectful. "Do you travel alone?" he asked. She paused, glancing around as if considering whether it was safe to answer. Finally, in a soft, careful voice, she said, "Yes, I have no family nearby." Her words were simple, but carried a weight that James could feel. He realized that this was not a casual statement, but a quiet confession of a life shaped by hardship, resilience, and survival. She was telling him something important without revealing too much, trusting him just enough to share a small piece of her reality. James nodded, understanding the delicate balance of trust. "It must be hard," he said softly. She did not respond immediately, but he could see the flicker of emotion in her eyes, a mix of sadness, strength, and endurance. James respected her silence, knowing that words were not always necessary to communicate. He stayed at a respectful distance, watching as she continued her work. The river's water flowed around her hands, carrying away dirt and mud, but it could not wash away the story etched into her eyes and movements. Over the next few days, James and the woman continued to encounter each other by the river. Each meeting was careful, cautious, but meaningful. He learned to bring small provisions, dried meat, a cloth, fresh water, gifts offered without expectation, simply to show goodwill and respect. She accepted them quietly, placing them carefully beside her, acknowledging the gesture without words. Through these small exchanges, a bond began to form. It was fragile at first, like a tiny spark in the darkness, but it grew steadily, built on observation, patience, and mutual respect. James began to notice patterns in her behavior. She would wash clothes in the morning, gather water, and forage for edible plants along the riverbank. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, yet they revealed a deep understanding of her environment. She listened to the sounds of the land, the rustle of leaves, the flow of the river, the calls of animals, and moved in harmony with them. James realized that this skill was not only practical, but also a reflection of her inner strength. She had learned to survive in a world that often offered little mercy, and she did so with quiet dignity. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, James noticed her pausing to rest. She sat on a smooth rock, her legs drawn close, her torn dress fluttering slightly in the breeze. He approached carefully, keeping his distance, and spoke softly. "You are very strong," he said. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought. Then, after a pause, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm.
"I have to be," she said.
The simplicity of her words carried a powerful meaning. She had endured challenges that James could barely imagine, and she faced each day with courage and resilience. James felt a deep sense of respect for her. He realized that her torn dress, once a source of shock, was now a symbol of survival and strength. Every tear, every patch, told a story of endurance, of moving forward despite obstacles, and of facing the world with determination. He understood that she had chosen her path, not out of weakness, but out of necessity and wisdom. Her independence and resilience inspired him, challenging his own understanding of strength and courage. As the days passed, James began to share small pieces of his own life with her. He spoke of the long hours on horseback, of tending cattle, and the quiet solitude of life on the plains. He did not expect her to respond in detail, but he noticed that she listened intently, sometimes nodding or offering a small smile. These tiny interactions built trust between them, a silent acknowledgement that they were both navigating the world as best they could. He admired her ability to listen, to observe, and to respond with careful thought, qualities that were as valuable as physical strength in the wilderness. One evening, as the sun set and painted the river and plains in warm shades of orange and gold, James decided to test the limits of their growing trust. He approached her slowly, holding out a small bundle of food and a cloth he had brought. "For you," he said, his voice gentle. She looked at him, her eyes studying his expression, then carefully took the items. She did not speak, but her small nod of acknowledgement was enough. James understood that this was a significant step, a sign that she was willing to accept help without feeling threatened or vulnerable. Through these interactions, James began to see more than just a survivor. He saw a person with thoughts, feelings, and a story waiting to be told. He realized that trust was fragile, built slowly through actions rather than words. She had allowed him to witness a small part of her life, and in doing so, she had taught him lessons about patience, respect, and understanding. Every encounter revealed more of her character, and every moment spent by the river deepened his admiration for her resilience and quiet dignity. James also began to reflect on his own life. He recognized the comfort and ease he often took for granted as a cowboy, compared to the constant challenges she faced. He admired her courage in the face of uncertainty, her ability to survive and adapt, and her unwavering strength despite hardship. The more he observed her, the more he realized that true bravery was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and persistent, carried in small actions and daily decisions. One afternoon, as he watched her carefully gather water from the river, James noticed a moment of vulnerability. A gust of wind blew her torn dress, and she quickly adjusted it, her movements precise, but revealing the constant awareness she carried. He realized that every step, every action was measured, a testament to her experience and her understanding of danger. She had survived by being vigilant, by paying attention to every detail, and by trusting her instincts. Her torn dress was not a sign of weakness, but a symbol of the strength required to endure the challenges she faced. As the sun began to set once more, James felt a sense of connection he had never experienced before. Though words were limited and communication often relied on gestures and shared observations, he felt that they understood each other in a way that went beyond language. She had taught him to see the world differently, to recognize courage in quiet actions, and to appreciate the resilience required to survive in harsh conditions. He knew that this bond, though fragile, was meaningful and would shape the way he saw the world from that day forward. That evening, as James rode away from the river, he looked back at the woman one last time. She continued her work, her torn dress moving with the breeze, a testament to her strength, resilience, and determination. James realized that their encounters, though brief and cautious, had changed him. He had learned to observe, to respect, and to admire the quiet courage of someone living in a world that demanded resilience every day. She was more than a stranger. She was a teacher, a symbol of endurance, and a reminder that strength often comes in unexpected forms. James had grown used to riding along the river, hoping to see the woman again. Each encounter had been brief, cautious, yet meaningful, and he found himself thinking about her even when he was far from the river. There was something about her quiet strength, the way she carried herself despite her torn dress, and the hardships he imagined she had faced, that stayed with him. It was not just curiosity that drew him back. It was admiration and a growing desire to understand her story. One late afternoon, James arrived at the river to find her already there, her hands moving skillfully through the water. She noticed him almost immediately, but unlike the first time, there was no tension in her eyes. She watched him for a moment, then returned to her work, as if acknowledging him without needing to speak. James approached slowly, mindful of the unspoken rules that seemed to govern their encounters. He could see the small cuts and bruises on her arms and legs, evidence of travel through rough terrain, but he also noticed the careful way she moved. Every motion was deliberate, almost graceful, as though she had learned to turn necessity into a skill. He stayed at a respectful distance, watching her rhythmically wash the clothes in the river. The sunlight glinted off the water, creating patterns that danced across her hands and the surface of the river. James felt a strange mix of awe and respect. She had endured challenges he could barely imagine, yet she worked without complaint, without hesitation. Her torn dress, once a shocking sight, now seemed like a badge of honor, a symbol of her courage and perseverance. No rub bed. He realized that she had survived because she had learned to be careful, to be strong, and to respect the world around her. James decided to speak gently, trying to bridge the gap between them. "You are very skilled," he said. "I have never seen anyone work like that." The woman paused, lifting her head to meet his gaze. There was a brief moment of silence, as if she were weighing his words, deciding whether to respond. Then she spoke softly, her voice quiet but clear. "I have done this for a long time. It is how I live." The simplicity of her words carried a powerful meaning. She was telling him that her life had been shaped by hard work, resilience, and survival, and that she had learned to rely on her own strength. James nodded, understanding the depth behind her statement. It must not be easy living alone like this, he said gently. She did not respond immediately, but he could see a flicker of emotion in her eyes, a mixture of sadness, determination, and quiet pride. He realized that she had faced many challenges, but she had also learned to meet them with courage and intelligence. Her life was not one of comfort or ease, but it was one of dignity, and he admired her deeply for that. Over the following days, James continued to visit the river. Each time he brought small gifts, dried meat, fresh water, or a clean cloth. She accepted them without words, placing them carefully beside her as a quiet acknowledgement of his gesture. Through these simple exchanges, a bond began to form. It was fragile at first, built on observation, patience, and respect, but it grew steadily. James began to understand that trust was not given lightly, especially to someone who had learned to survive alone. He did not try to force it. Instead, he let it develop naturally, step by careful step. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, James noticed her struggling slightly with a heavy bundle of clothes. He approached cautiously and offered his help. At first, she hesitated, clearly not accustomed to accepting assistance, but then she nodded slightly, allowing him to carry the bundle to the riverbank. This small act of cooperation created a subtle shift between them. She had allowed him into her space, and he had shown that he could be trusted. From that moment, their bond began to deepen, moving beyond silent acknowledgement to shared understanding. James began to share small stories of his life as a cowboy. He spoke of long rides across the plains, tending cattle, and the solitude of his work. She listened intently, occasionally nodding or offering a small smile, her eyes reflecting both curiosity and understanding. Though her words were limited, she conveyed meaning through gestures, expressions, and careful observation. James realized that communication was not always about language. It could be about presence, trust, and shared experiences. In her quiet way, she was teaching him lessons about patience, respect, and resilience. As their encounters continued, James noticed moments of vulnerability in her that made her seem even more human. One evening, a sudden gust of wind blew her torn dress, and she quickly adjusted it, her movements precise but revealing the constant vigilance she carried. He realized that every action, no matter how small, was deliberate, a reflection of her experience and survival instincts. Her torn dress was not a sign of weakness, he thought, but of the courage required to endure the challenges of her life. James also began to notice small signs of emotion in her that suggested a deeper story. When he spoke of his life, he sometimes saw a flicker of longing or sadness in her eyes, as if she had experienced similar struggles. He realized that beneath the resilience and independence, there was a human desire for connection, understanding, and perhaps even companionship. This awareness deepened his admiration and respect for her, as he recognized that strength did not mean the absence of emotion. It meant facing life fully, even when it was difficult. One evening, as the sun set and the river glowed with golden light, James and the woman sat near the water, each quietly observing the other. He offered her a small piece of cloth he had brought, and she accepted it with a nod, placing it carefully beside her. They did not speak, but there was a sense of understanding, a shared acknowledgement that they were no longer strangers. This silent connection was more meaningful than any words could convey. It was built on trust, respect, and the recognition of each other's strength. Through these days by the river, James began to feel a sense of hope. He had encountered many people in his life, but few had left such a lasting impression. The woman in the torn dress had shown him that strength could take many forms, physical, mental, and emotional. She had survived in a harsh world through courage, intelligence, and careful observation, and she had allowed him, in small ways, to witness her life. This experience had changed him, teaching him lessons about trust, patience, and the quiet power of resilience. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, James prepared to leave for the evening. He looked back at the woman one last time. She continued her work, moving with careful precision, her torn dress catching the fading light. In that moment, James understood that their encounters were more than chance. They were a meeting of two people who had learned to navigate the world with skill, courage, and respect. She had become more than a stranger. She had become a symbol of endurance, a reminder that true strength often appeared quietly in the way one moved through the world, faced challenges, and maintained dignity in the face of hardship. James rode slowly away from the river, carrying with him a sense of gratitude and reflection. He thought about the lessons he had learned from observing her: patience, respect, resilience, and the quiet power of endurance. He knew that their bond, though fragile and unspoken, was significant. It was a reminder that human connection could take many forms, and that trust and understanding could be built even in the harshest of circumstances. As he rode into the distance, James felt a profound sense of admiration for the woman in the torn dress. She had taught him that survival was not just about physical strength, but about intelligence, observation, and the courage to face life fully. Her presence had changed the way he viewed the world, showing him that true resilience came in many forms, and that even the smallest gestures of trust and understanding could create lasting bonds. That evening, James set up his camp along the trail, but his thoughts remained by the river. He replayed the moments he had shared with the woman in his mind, the careful movements, the silent exchanges, and the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. He knew that he would return to the river again and again, drawn not just by curiosity, but by respect, admiration, and the desire to continue learning from someone who had endured so much with quiet strength. James realized that life on the plains was full of lessons, and that encounters like this one were rare and precious. The woman in the torn dress had shown him that courage and resilience were not always loud or visible. They were often quiet, subtle, and persistent. He felt honored to have witnessed her life in a small way, and he knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever, shaping the way he approached challenges, relationships, and the world around him. The days had passed quickly along the river, and James had come to look forward to each visit. He had grown accustomed to the routine, riding along the trail, catching glimpses of the woman in the torn dress, exchanging small gestures of trust, and quietly observing her resilience and skill. Over time, he had developed a deep respect and admiration for her, not just for her ability to survive, but for the quiet dignity she carried in every motion, every glance, and every decision she made. She was a living lesson in courage, endurance, and independence, but James knew that their time together would not last forever. The woman whose name he had learned was Lala was not bound to the river or the plains. She had her own path to follow, a family to find, and a life that could not be confined to his visits or the small gestures of friendship they shared. He had always understood this, but now the reality weighed on him more heavily than ever. He realized that he would have to let her go, despite the bond they had slowly built over weeks of cautious interaction. One morning, as the sun began to rise, casting soft light over the river, James noticed Layla packing her few belongings. Her movements were careful and deliberate, as always, but there was a subtle tension in her posture that told him she was preparing to leave. The sight stirred a mix of emotions in James: sadness, respect, and a profound sense of gratitude for having known her. He dismounted and approached slowly, speaking gently as he always did. You leaving?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked up at him, her eyes calm but serious. "Yes," she replied simply. James nodded, understanding. He had always known this day would come, but the moment felt heavier than he had anticipated. He wanted to say more, to express how much he had learned from her and how deeply he respected her strength, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he offered a small bundle of provisions, dried meat, a cloth, and fresh water. "For your journey," he said quietly. Layla accepted them, placing them carefully in her pack. Her small nod of acknowledgment spoke volumes, conveying gratitude, trust, and understanding without the need for lengthy words. As she prepared to leave, James took a moment to observe her closely. Her torn dress, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze, no longer seemed fragile. It was a symbol of everything she had endured: the long journey, the struggles, the moments of solitude, and the strength she had displayed in every step. James realized that he would never forget the image of her moving through the river, her hands skilled and strong, her eyes clear and determined, and her spirit unbroken despite the hardships she had faced. He wanted to say something to encourage her, something that might ease the burden of leaving. "You are stronger than most people I have ever met," he said. "No matter where you go, remember that." Lala paused, studying his face for a moment. Then, with a faint smile, she replied, "I know."
Thank you. Her words were simple, but they carried a depth of meaning that James could feel.
It was as if she had internalized every lesson she had learned through hardship and now carried it with her as she moved forward. As she stepped onto the trail, James noticed how carefully she moved, checking the ground, listening to the sounds of the plains, and making sure her path was safe. Every motion reflected her experience, her intelligence, and her ability to survive. James realized that this careful vigilance was part of what made her remarkable. She was not just enduring life, she was navigating it with skill and grace, finding strength and control in every choice she made. Her torn dress, once shocking, now seemed to embody resilience and courage in its every tear and patch. James felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he watched her walk away. He had come to admire her deeply, not only for her survival skills but for her quiet dignity and the lessons she had taught him about patience, observation, and respect. Their bond had grown in small, meaningful ways, through silent gestures, shared moments, and the mutual understanding that had developed between them. Though words had been few, the connection was strong, and James knew it would remain with him forever. As Layla moved farther along the trail, James reflected on the impact she had had on his life. He thought about the long hours he had spent observing her, learning from her actions and respecting her space. He realized that true courage was not always loud or obvious. It was often quiet, persistent, and resilient, demonstrated in small actions and careful choices. Layla had shown him that strength could take many forms, and that even in a world full of hardship, dignity and resilience could shine brightly. The sun rose higher, casting warm light over the plains and river, and James finally mounted his horse. He watched Layla from a distance, seeing her disappear gradually into the horizon. Though their paths were now separating, he felt a sense of peace. He had been privileged to witness her strength, her courage, and her quiet determination. He knew that their encounter had changed him, deepening his understanding of resilience, trust, and the subtle power of human connection. James rode along the river for a while longer, taking in the landscape that had been the backdrop of their meetings. The river flowed steadily, as if carrying away their moments together but leaving their significance behind. The wind rustled through the grass, and the plains seemed to whisper reminders of the lessons he had learned: patience, observation, respect, and the quiet endurance that defined true courage. He thought about how fleeting encounters could leave lasting impressions, and how even a brief connection with someone like Layla could transform one's perspective on life. That evening, as James made camp beneath a cluster of trees, he reflected on the past weeks. He thought about the first time he had spotted her by the river, the initial shock at her torn dress, and the gradual understanding of the life she had led. He remembered her strength, her vigilance, and the way she had communicated without needing many words. He realized that she had taught him more about resilience and dignity than any other person he had ever met. Every moment spent observing her, interacting with her cautiously, and learning from her had left an indelible mark on his life. As night fell and the stars appeared, James felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had witnessed something extraordinary, a life shaped by courage and survival, a spirit that remained unbroken despite challenges. Layla's presence had reminded him that strength could be quiet, resilience could be subtle, and dignity could shine through even the most difficult circumstances. He understood that while their paths were now separate, the lessons she had imparted through her actions and quiet presence would stay with him forever. In the days and years that followed, James often returned to the river, hoping to catch a glimpse of Layla once more. Sometimes he saw signs of her passage, footprints along the riverbank, remnants of a small fire, or disturbed grass where she had rested. Each of these moments reminded him of the brief but meaningful connection they had shared. He realized that encounters like these were rare and precious, shaping one's understanding of the world and the people in it. Layla had left a mark not through grand gestures, but through the quiet demonstration of her courage, intelligence, and perseverance. Even as time passed and memories began to fade, James never forgot the lessons she had taught him. He carried them into his work, into his travels, and into every interaction he had with others. He learned to observe carefully, to respect the lives and experiences of those around him, and to recognize courage in its many forms. Layla's torn dress, once a shocking sight, became a symbol in his mind of human resilience and dignity, a reminder that appearances often hid remarkable stories of survival and strength. Years later, James would tell the story of the woman by the river to those willing to listen, though always with reverence and care. He never revealed her name to many, keeping the memory sacred, as he had come to understand the importance of privacy, respect, and the quiet power of human dignity. He described her courage, her independence, and the quiet wisdom she carried, emphasizing that her strength lay not in bold acts of heroism, but in the steady, persistent courage of living fully and wisely in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. Whenever James thought of her, he remembered the river, the sunlight glinting off the water, the sound of her hands moving through it, and the torn dress that had first caught his attention. He remembered the small gestures, the silent conversations, and the deep respect that had grown between them over time. He realized that these moments, fleeting as they were, had taught him something far greater than survival. They had taught him about human resilience, trust, dignity, and the quiet but powerful impact one life can have on another. And so the memory of Layla, the woman in the torn dress by the river, remained with James forever. It was a memory of courage and perseverance, of connection and understanding, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. Even as he rode across the plains and lived out the rest of his days, he carried with him the lessons she had imparted silently through her actions, her strength, and her dignity. She had stopped him cold at the river once, but she had left an impression that would guide him, inspire him, and remind him of the quiet heroism that exists in everyday life.